The heavy oak door of the Victorian house on Elm Street had barely clicked shut behind me when the screaming began. It was a sound that didn't just pierce the air, it seemed to shred the very fabric of the quiet Tuesday afternoon I had tried to construct for myself. I stood in the entryway, clutching my purse against my chest like a shield, while the smell of rain and wet pavement still clung to my wool coat. Before I could even hang up my keys, my daughter, Harper, was there. Her face, usually so carefully composed with layers of expensive foundation, was contorted into a mask of unrecognizable rage. Her eyes were wide, manic, and blazing with a fury that stopped my breath in my throat. Behind her, pacing the living room rug like a panther trapped in a too-small cage, was Greg. My son-in-law held his smartphone in a grip so tight his knuckles were white. The veins in his neck were throbbing, a visible pulse of erratic anger that terrified me more than I cared to admit. They didn't give me a chance to speak, to breathe, or even to take off my rain-soaked shoes. "Have you lost your absolute mind, Mother?" Harper screamed, her voice cracking at the high octaves. She marched toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor that my late husband Arthur and I had refinished with our own hands 30 years ago. "Do you have any idea what just happened?" Greg tried to pay for the contractor at the hardware store. The card was declined. "Declined? Mother! In front of everyone!" Her words ricocheted off the high ceilings, laced with a venom that I had grown accustomed to over the last 4 years, though it had never been this concentrated, this potent. It was the sound of entitlement being fractured. Greg stopped pacing and thrust his phone toward my face, invading my personal space with aggressive entitlement. "Where is the money, Eleanor?" Greg roared. His voice wasn't just angry, it was desperate. It was the roar of a man who had built a house of cards and just watched the wind pick up. "The account shows zero balance. Zero. Transfer it back. Now. Right now." I looked at them both. I looked at Harper, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose tears I had dried, whose college tuition I had paid for by working double shifts at the library. I looked at Greg, the man who had promised to cherish her, standing there in a designer sweater that I had unknowingly paid for. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It wasn't fear. For the first time in years, it wasn't fear. It was a cold, hard clarity, like the surface of a frozen lake. I walked past them, placing my purse on the antique side table with a deliberate calmness that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. I slowly unbuttoned my coat, taking my time, letting their panic hang in the air. "I changed the bank routing numbers," I said, my voice steady, lacking the tremble that had defined my existence in this house for so long. I turned to face them, standing tall despite the arthritis burning in my lower back. "This morning, I opened a new account at a different bank. My pension and my Social Security now deposit there. It is an account that neither of you has access to." The silence that followed was deafening. It was physical, heavy, and suffocating. Harper's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Greg's face cycled through a spectrum of colors, from a flushed red to a sickly, ghostly pale. It was the suspended moment before a car crash, the split second where the inevitable impact is realized but hasn't yet occurred. "What?" Harper whispered, the scream dying in her throat, replaced by genuine shock. "You can't do that. You cannot do that. We have bills, we have the mortgage, we have the car payments." "The mortgage?" I repeated, feeling something inside my chest harden into steel. "You mean the mortgage on the vacation home you bought in Aspen? Or are you referring to the payments on Greg's new luxury SUV? Because the mortgage on this house, Harper, the one we are standing in, was paid off by your father and me in 1998. Greg took a step forward, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You live under our roof, Eleanor. You eat our food. You use our electricity. It is the bare minimum that you contribute to the household expenses. You are being incredibly selfish." A bitter, dry laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Our roof? How fascinating that you call it that." I looked around the foyer, at the wainscoting Arthur had installed, at the chandelier we had bought in Paris for our 25th anniversary. "The deed to this house still has my name on it, Greg. You and Harper moved in here 4 years ago because you lost your condo in the city when your crypto investment firm went under. Do you remember that? Or have you rewritten history to suit your ego? Harper let out a choked sob, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. I can't believe you are speaking to us like this. I am your daughter. After everything we have done for you? This is how you repay us? By cutting us off? By humiliating Greg? Tears began to stream down her cheeks, but I knew these tears. I had studied them for a lifetime. They were not tears of sorrow or regret. They were tears of frustration. They were the tears of a child who had been told no for the first time in a very long time. Everything you've done for me? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. Let's examine that, shall we? You've done so much. You wake me up at 5 in the morning to make your smoothies, because the noise of the blender bothers you if you do it yourself. You leave your laundry in piles outside my door, as if I am the hotel staff. You host dinner parties where I am expected to cook and clean and then retreat to my room so I don't embarrass you in front of your friends. Is that what you mean by taking care of me? Greg punched the wall next to the coat rack, the thud vibrating through the floorboards. He knocked a framed photograph of Arthur and me askew. You are a senile, ungrateful old woman. Without us, you would be rotting in a state facility. You would be alone. You need us. 6 months ago, those words would have shattered me. They would have sent me retreating to my bedroom, sobbing into my pillow, terrified of the loneliness they threatened me with. But today, after what I had seen, after the truth I had uncovered in black and white printed text, his words were nothing but noise. They were the desperate thrashing of a parasite realizing the host was no longer compliant. Maybe I am ungrateful, I said, picking up my purse again, signaling that this conversation was over. And maybe I am old, but this old woman just reclaimed her life. I began to walk toward the stairs, my hand gripping the banister that Arthur had sanded smooth. Harper collapsed onto the velvet ottoman, the one I had paid for, when she decided the old one was too vintage. Mom, please, she wailed. We have commitments. Greg has investors coming next week. We put the catering on your card. You're going to ruin us. I paused on the third step and looked down at them. The perspective shift was dizzying. They looked so small from up here. I am going to ruin you? I asked. Isn't that ironic? For 4 years, you have bled me dry. Every cent Arthur left me, every dollar of my pension. And now that I have decided to keep what is mine, I am the villain. Greg looked up at me, and for the first time, the rage in his eyes was eclipsed by fear. Real, tangible fear. The fear of a man who had never actually had to work for his lifestyle. Eleanor, let's be reasonable, he said, his voice trembling. We can work this out. We can make a budget. You don't have to do something this drastic. I looked at the man who had charmed his way into my family 10 years ago. The man who had promised Arthur on his deathbed that he would look after us. The only thing we are going to work out, I said, is your departure date. I turned and climbed the rest of the stairs, leaving them in the wreckage of their own expectations. Each step I took felt lighter than the last. It had taken me 72 years to learn this lesson, but as I reached the landing, I knew it was the most important one of my life. Family is not defined by blood, but by respect, and dignity is not something you can negotiate. Behind me, I heard Harper sobbing and Greg cursing under his breath, making frantic phone calls. But for the first time in 4 years, those sounds didn't break my heart. They just reminded me why I had walked into the First National Bank that morning and uttered the words that saved my life. I need to report a theft, and I need to open a new account that no one else knows about. It all started on a gray November morning, 4 years ago, at Arthur's funeral. I remember the biting cold of the wind off Lake Michigan and the smell of damp earth and white lilies. I remember the way the rain misted on the black umbrellas, creating a sea of mourning turtles. Arthur had been the love of my life, my anchor. We had been married for 45 years. He was a man of quiet strength, an architect who saw the structure in everything, who made me feel safe in a chaotic world. When his heart stopped on a Tuesday while he was sketching in his study, my world collapsed with him. The months following his death were a blur of administrative grief. Lawyers, death certificates, the endless casseroles from neighbors that tasted like pity. I was lost in the cavernous silence of our home. I would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for him, only to find cold sheets. I was vulnerable, fragile, and desperately lonely. That was when Harper and Greg swooped in. "Mom, you cannot stay here alone," Harper had said, sitting on the edge of my bed, holding my hand with a tenderness I hadn't seen since she was a child. "It's too big for you. The memories. They're haunting you. Come, let us take care of you. Greg and I, we want to be here. We want to fill this house with life again." I resisted at first. This house was my sanctuary. But the silence was wearing me down, and Greg, he was so convincing. "Eleanor," he had said, flashing that charming smile, "we are struggling a bit with the condo market right now. If we move in, we can sell our place, invest the capital, and manage the maintenance of this big house for you. It's a win-win. We help you, you help us. We're family." I agreed. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be loved. I wanted the noise of family to drown out the silence of widowhood. The transition was subtle, insidious. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion of my boundaries, like water dripping on stone. First, it was the little things. Greg suggested it would be easier if he handled the utility bills since he was already paying for the internet. Then Harper said she needed to borrow my credit card for groceries because she had left hers in her other purse. Then came the renovations. "This kitchen is so dated, Mom," Harper complained one morning. "If we're going to live here, we need to modernize. It increases the property value for you." I paid for the renovation, $20,000 from the savings Arthur had set aside for our travels. I told myself it was an investment. I told myself I was helping my daughter build a home. Then came the loans. Greg's business needed a bridge loan. Harper had credit card debt from before they moved in that was accruing high interest. "Just a few thousand here, a few thousand there. I'll pay you back next month, Eleanor, I promise," Greg would say. But next month never came. By the second year, I wasn't just the bank. I was the live-in maid. Since I was retired and home all day, it was assumed I would handle the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry. If I missed a spot on the counter, Greg would sigh loudly. If dinner wasn't ready by 6, Harper would roll her eyes and order expensive takeout on my card, claiming I had forced them to spend money because I was lazy. I became a ghost in my own home. I stopped inviting friends over because Harper complained they were too loud. I stopped going to my book club because Greg said he needed the car and didn't have time to drop me off. I shrank. I made myself smaller and smaller, hoping that if I took up less space, they would love me more. The breaking point didn't come with a bang, but with a whisper. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks ago. I was dusting the study Greg's office now when I knocked over a stack of mail. As I bent down to pick it up, a credit card statement caught my eye. It was for a platinum Amex card, a card I didn't know I had. I froze. The name on the envelope was mine, Eleanor Vance, but I had never applied for this card. My hands trembling, I opened it. The balance was $15,000. I sat on the floor, the dust rag forgotten in my hand. I scanned the charges: a ski trip to Vail, a diamond bracelet, high-end electronics, dinners at steakhouses where the bill for two was more than my monthly grocery budget. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just borrowing. This was identity theft. This was fraud. I put the statement back exactly where I found it and left the room. I felt nauseous. I wanted to confront them immediately, but a voice inside my head, Arthur's voice, rational and calm, stopped me. "You need proof, Ellie. You need to know the full extent of the damage." For the next 2 weeks, I played the part. I cooked the meals. I ironed the shirts. I smiled when Harper criticized my outfit. But while they slept, or while they were out spending my money, I was investigating. I went through the recycling bin. I found statements for 3 other credit cards. I found withdrawal slips from my savings account. They had drained nearly everything. The nest egg Arthur and I had built over 40 years of hard work was gone. Over $80,000 in cash, plus the credit card debt. I felt like a fool. A gullible, pathetic old woman who had let her loneliness blind her to the vipers in her nest. But alongside the shame, a spark of anger began to ignite. It started small, but it grew hotter with every disrespectful comment, with every dismissive gesture. The final straw was a conversation I overheard 2 days ago. I was in the kitchen, and they were on the patio, drinking wine. The window was slightly open. "She's getting slower," Greg was saying. "It's annoying. She forgot to pick up my dry cleaning again." "We have to put up with it for a few more years," Harper replied, her voice slurring slightly. "Once she kicks the bucket, the house is ours. We can sell it and finally move to California like we planned. The land value alone is worth a fortune. We just need to make sure she doesn't spend any more on her medical needs." Greg laughed. "That hip surgery she wants? Total waste of money. She's barely mobile anyway." I stood there, clutching the countertop, feeling the world tilt on its axis. They weren't just using me. They were waiting for me to die. They were actively counting down the days until they could cash in my existence for a condo in Malibu. That was the moment Eleanor the victim died, and Eleanor the survivor was born. The next morning, I took the bus to the bank. I didn't ask Greg for a ride. I walked 3 blocks in the rain to the bus stop, my arthritis screaming with every step, but I didn't care. I sat down with the branch manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Henderson, and I told her everything. I showed her the statements I had pilfered from the trash. Mrs. Henderson looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Vance," she said gently, "this is elder financial abuse. We need to freeze everything. We need to open new accounts. And frankly, you should call the police." I wasn't ready for the police yet, but I was ready to cut the cord. I transferred my Social Security. I transferred the meager remains of my pension. I closed the joint access accounts. I reported the credit cards as fraudulent. And then I went home and waited. I waited for the card to decline. I waited for the explosion. Now, sitting in my bedroom with the door locked, listening to the chaos downstairs, I felt a strange sense of peace. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Maya?" I said when my granddaughter answered. "Grandma." Maya's voice was warm, surprised. "Is everything okay? Mom told me you were too sick to talk on the phone lately." Maya was Harper's daughter from her first marriage. She was 26, a sharp-witted environmental lawyer living in Chicago. She was the best of us, the one who had inherited Arthur's integrity. "I'm not sick, Maya," I said clearly. "But I need your help. I need a lawyer." The next 3 days were a battlefield. The house was divided into territories. I stayed in my room or the kitchen. Harper and Greg occupied the living room, speaking in hushed, frantic whispers. They tried every tactic in the book. First came the love bombing. Harper brought me breakfast in bed, burned toast and cold coffee. "Mom, we're so sorry," she said, her eyes puffy. "We didn't realize how much we were spending. It got out of control. We love you. We just want to be a family." I ate the toast and said nothing. Then came the guilt. Greg cornered me in the hallway. "Do you know what this is doing to Harper? She's having a breakdown. If she ends up in the hospital, it's on your conscience, Eleanor." I looked him in the eye and said, "If she ends up in the hospital, I hope she has valid health insurance, because my credit card won't be paying for it." Finally came the aggression. They slammed doors. They turned the TV up to maximum volume at midnight. They ate food they brought in and left the dirty containers on the counter for me to clean. I didn't clean them. I swept them into a garbage bag and left it on their bed. On Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I went down to answer it, ignoring Harper's demand to know who it was. Maya stood there, looking fierce in a trench coat, shaking a wet umbrella. She looked so much like Arthur in that moment that my heart ached. "Hi, Grandma," she said, hugging me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "I'm here." Maya walked into the living room, where Harper and Greg were sitting amidst a pile of unpaid bills. The air in the room changed instantly. Maya wasn't just a daughter or a granddaughter, she was a litigator. "Maya!" Harper cried, standing up, looking for an ally. "Thank God you're here. Your grandmother has gone senile. She's cut us off. She's having a paranoid episode." Maya didn't hug her mother. She didn't even smile. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick file. "Grandma sent me the copies of the bank statements. Mom," Maya said, her voice cool and professional, I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing them. Greg stood up, trying to assert dominance. Now listen here, young lady. This is a private family matter. Sit down, Greg, Maya said. She didn't shout, but the authority in her voice made him drop back onto the sofa. This isn't a family matter, Maya continued. This is a criminal matter: grand larceny, identity theft, credit card fraud, elder abuse. I've tallied the numbers. You've misappropriated over $85,000 of Grandma's assets. Harper went pale. We were going to pay it back. It was a loan. A loan requires consent, Maya countered. Forging signatures on credit card applications is a felony. Now, Grandma has given me power of attorney. We have two options here. Option A: I take this file to the district attorney on Monday morning. Based on the evidence, you're looking at 5 to 7 years in prison, both of you. The room went silent. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on them. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about freedom. What's option B? Greg asked, his voice barely a whisper. Option B, I said, stepping forward. You leave, you pack your bags, and you leave my house. Today, you sign a document admitting to the debt, and you agree to a repayment plan. It will be small. I know you don't have the money, but you will pay me back every month for the rest of your lives if necessary. And in exchange, I don't press charges. But where will we go? Harper cried. We have nowhere. You have friends, I said. You have that vacation home in Aspen you brag about. Oh wait, the bank owns that, don't they? Figure it out, Harper. You are 45 years old. Figure it out. The eviction was swift and painful. Watching my daughter pack her life into boxes was one of the hardest things I have ever done. She cried the whole time, begging, pleading, trying to manipulate me one last time. But Maya stood by my side, a sentinel of truth. When the last box was loaded into Greg's SUV, Harper turned to me at the door. I hate you, she hissed. I hope you die alone in this big, empty house. I looked at her, seeing the pain beneath the hate, but refusing to absorb it. I won't be alone, Harper. I have myself. And for the first time in a long time, I like the company. They drove away, taillights fading into the gray dusk. Maya ordered pizza, and we sat on the floor of the living room, drinking wine out of the good crystal. Are you okay, Grandma? She asked gently. I took a sip of wine. It tasted like grapes and freedom. I will be, I said. It hurts, Maya. It hurts like losing a limb. But the limb was gangrenous. It had to be cut off to save the body. The months that followed were a time of reconstruction. I reclaimed my space. I painted the kitchen a bright, sunny yellow, a color Harper had always hated. I joined a yoga class for seniors. I started volunteering at the library again. I reconnected with old friends who were delighted to see me back from the dead. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was peaceful. It was a canvas I could fill with my own thoughts, my own music, my own life. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I was gardening in the front yard, pruning the hydrangeas Arthur had planted. A beat-up sedan pulled up to the curb. Harper stepped out. She looked different. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. She looked tired. She looked older. She looked real. She walked up the driveway slowly, stopping a few feet away from me. She didn't have that manic look in her eyes anymore. Greg left me, she said simply. He found a younger woman with a trust fund. I'm living in a studio apartment in the city. I'm working as a receptionist at a dental office. I nodded, clipping a dead bloom. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm paying my own rent, she continued. It's hard. I take the bus. My feet hurt all the time. I stopped clipping and looked at her. Welcome to the real world, Harper. She looked at the house, then back at me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but these were different. They were quieter, humble. I miss you, Mom, she whispered. I miss who I was before I let greed eat me alive. Can we ever fix this? I looked at my daughter. I loved her. A mother's love doesn't just vanish, no matter how badly it is betrayed. But trust? Trust is a china plate. Once shattered, You can glue it back together, but the cracks will always be visible. I don't know, Harper, I said honestly. I don't know if we can fix it. You broke something very deep. I know, she nodded, looking down at her shoes. I'm sending you a check on the 1st. It's only $200. It's all I can afford right now toward the debt. That's a start, I said. She hesitated, shifting her weight. Can I come in for a glass of water? I looked at the door of my house, my sanctuary. I thought about the peace I had fought so hard to regain. I thought about the boundaries I had built. Not today, I said gently. I'm not ready for that today. Maybe in a few months. Maybe when you've sent a few more checks. Maybe when you've proven that you are here for me, and not for what I can give you. Harper nodded, swallowing hard. She understood. For the first time in her life, she heard no and accepted it. Okay, Mom, I understand. She turned to walk away. Harper? I called out. She turned back, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Drive safe, I said. She smiled, a small, sad, genuine smile. You too, Mom. I watched her drive away. I went back to my hydrangeas, feeling the sun on my face. I was 72 years old. I was alone in a big house. I had scars on my heart and arthritis in my knees. But as I dug my hands into the rich, dark earth, I felt incredibly, undeniably alive. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that you cannot buy love and you cannot sell your dignity. We teach people how to treat us. And I had finally taught the world that Eleanor Vance was not a resource to be mined, but a woman to be reckoned with. And that, I realized as I smelled the autumn air, was a legacy worth more than any house, any bank account, or any inheritance. It was the legacy of self-respect,